So Darren Childs has stepped down from his role effective immediately as Chief Executive of Premiership Rugby Limited. They're on the lookout for a new person for that role. And it's a pretty sad end to a pretty sad tenure, as we will discuss on this video. My name's Tim. This is Egg Chasers. If you haven't already, please do hit subscribe. I don't understand how the algorithm works, but if you hit like, that helps people that like rugby find us. So I'd very much appreciate that. Nice one. So yeah, Darren Childs. Now, before I get into this, I am a bit of a 20th century history nerd when I'm not nosing about rugby. And one of the best things I've listened to, and I'd definitely give this as a tip for a podcast to check out, Hardcore History by Dan Carlin. He does this incredible series called Blueprint for Armageddon. It's about 20 hours worth of talking about and constructing the story through World War One. It is one of the greatest bits of audio I've ever listened to. It's truly amazing. One of the things that Dan Carlin mentions a bunch of times through this series of podcasts about World War One is the difference between peacetime generals and wartime generals. And I think you can use that analogy here in the case of Darren Childs. I'm sure in a peacetime situation, when things are going through the relatively normal run of events, I'm sure he'd be a great leader. It's just that the time that Darren Childs has been in charge as Chief Executive of Premiership Rugby Limited, it's been anything but peacetime. This has been a wartime footing all along. It would have been probably the biggest issue for any leader, administrator in rugby to have dealt with, just having had the Saracens salary cap saga play out under your leadership. But he had that compounded with the last year and coronavirus and the impact on that in rugby. I'm not saying this to excuse Darren Childs. I'm just saying that I think it's now with hindsight we can say he was out of his depth in that context. Because the one thing that unites the whole last 20 months that Darren Childs has been running that arm of rugby union is we've heard very, very little. There has not been leadership. I think there's some rumours that he may have jumped before he was pushed. I'm not going to comment on that because it's only rumours. All I can say is the facts are that he's now not in the role, and I think that's a good thing for rugby union. Nothing to do with him as an individual, just to do with his competency in the role. And we heard absolutely no information. So when something like the Saracens salary cap scandal breaks, information is more critical than ever. A calm head, clear leadership, explanation, detail where it's required, simplicity where it's required. But we heard pretty much nothing for months. Then the Lord Dyson report came out and was absolutely damning on the way that rugby had been managed and the way that clubs had been operating inside the salary cap. Again, we heard nothing. And it was left to journalists to try and work out what was going on. Clubs didn't know quite what was going on. And as people consuming the game, it just looked like an absolute shambles. And then you jump forward to coronavirus. Now, nobody can predict any of this sort of things happening. And I've got a lot of sympathy for anyone who finds themselves in that situation. And I wouldn't have wanted to have been administering the game at this point. But again, when it came to reduction in salaries for players, when it came to the Rugby Players Association having an issue with Premiership Rugby Limited and the 25% cut in player salaries and clubs renegotiating new deals and then returning to play with crowds in the stadium, they had those trial events. Throughout that period, you heard pretty much nothing from the focal point of the organisation. And I just find that absolutely mind-boggling. And then you add in the TV deal, which now Darren Childs' background, he came from UK TV, and I gather CVC wanted him in the role because he would have a very, very key role in negotiating TV deals. Well, the backdrop is the pandemic, and you can definitely make some mitigating factors there. But and he eventually signed a deal with BT Sport, I think £110 million over 3 years, only after turning down higher offers, that is. So a pretty sorry tenure and a pretty sad end to it, but a good thing for the game from that point of view. And I think when you sort of tie this in with other areas going on in the game, have you noticed this week with all the European Super League stuff going on in football, not a whisper of anything to do with ring fencing from anybody, despite the fact that's a lot of people going, well, clearly, guys, elephant in the room right here, don't mention it, don't say a word. I hope we see more transparency. That's probably one word that we have had precious little of in rugby union, and it's the one thing we need much, much more of, or else you're risking fans getting fed up with the sport, fans turning away, not emotionally engaging, because as I've said so many times on videos, sport is storytelling, and if you're just saying nothing, the only story that's being told is something to hide. And on that, see you on the next video.